Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce's Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 25th of January 2024. Where should we go to first? Well, Germany, as ever these days in the military aid and equipment section, they seem to be the main providers of assistance, particularly in light of the US stepping back. More on that soon. German aid to Ukraine here says Handelsblatt reports that the UK has offered the German government a deal whereby Germany would supply the UK with an undisclosed number of Taurus KPD 350s, which would give the UK in return room to supply Ukraine with more Storm Shadows. So it would effectively be another ringtausch if the German government were to agree to this deal. Okay, so first of all, the German government haven't agreed to this, but it has been proposed. It appears that the makers of Taurus will provide Taurus. So Taurus is like an upgraded Storm Shadow. Okay, so I presume the UK could use those fairly easily without much adaptation. And that means, and it's exactly like we see in all of these forms of military assistance to Ukraine. Quite often, say in the US, it might be giving a bunch of Bradleys and then replacing them with upgraded Bradleys. But what you're doing, as I said, and I keep saying, as I said yesterday, when we give equipment to Ukraine, what we are effectively doing is upgrading our own military. So that it's like investing in our military. But you can see it as giving aid to Ukraine, or you can see it as investing in your own military. Or both. And this would be good for UK. So our airframes will be able to do a better job of hitting whatever it is they want to hit with the use of Taurus as opposed to Storm Shadows. And at the same time, Ukraine get a load more Storm Shadows. It could be that we could give them our entire stock of Storm Shadows and replace them entirely with Taurus. This is really cool, and it would allow Ukraine to get their hands on more of the valuable Storm Shadow cruise missiles that are doing such a fabulous job in Ukraine. Some people aren't so positive. Fabian Hoffman here says, if Germany takes this deal and delivers Taurus to UK in return for UK sending more Storm Shadows to Ukraine, this would make Scholz and Germany look incredibly weak and pathetic. I'm all for Ukraine getting more long-range strike weapons, but this is not the way. Some people are just like, no. Germany need to give Taurus to Ukraine. It needs to be that, not red line, but that kind of that commitment from Germany to take it to the next level, rather than provide that to UK and still give Ukraine things that are within the ranges they're firing at, within the capability they already have. So you can read that in several ways. Personally, I'm at a position where, gee whiz, Ukraine need everything they can get. If it means us getting Taurus and then getting our Storm Shadows, then I'm all for that. German aid to Ukraine again says, in the course of today, the German MOD disclosed several details on the delivery of the 6 Westland Sea King helicopters from the Bundeswehr stocks to Ukraine. So I reported on this recently. The UK gave it 3 Sea Kings ages ago. These are older helicopters that will be used for transportation of all sorts of stuff. They're not going to be like frontline attack helicopters, of course. They never were that anyway. They were used for air sea rescue longer after they were phased out of UK military. Now Germany have 6 of these, it appears, and are giving them to Ukraine. The delivery should be possible from April 2024. It includes a comprehensive equipment and spare parts package, as well as support for the flight and technical training. And Ukraine has expressed a clear need for helicopters during consultations and negotiations. And it's really good news. We'd like to see them get to Ukraine sooner rather than later, and April is a pretty good time frame. Ukrainian intel receives a new Me-2 AM-1 Medevac helicopter from Poland equipped with in-flight medical care. It can transport 3 lightly wounded or 1 critical patient, thanks to a volunteer initiative, Zbrojmy Ukraine, for the support. I was once airlifted. Here's a fun fact. I was airlifted for a rugby match when I used to play for Romsey. And I was playing, who is it against? I don't know, Aldershot or something. And I got a back injury. And they airlifted me to the hospital. Gave me a bunch of painkillers, told me to get on with it. But I had the fun of being airlifted. So that was quite a thing. Nothing compared to being shot in the liver and shoulder, being airlifted because you're barely alive. Quite different. Right, partners, quote, partners are ready to provide Ukraine with F-16s. The question is whether everything is ready for them to work in Ukraine. The F-16s to work in Ukraine, says Air Force spokesman Yuri Ihnat. According to him, everything should be ready from pilots, infrastructure to engineers. Quote, currently, the preparation is not completed. Therefore, the partners do not hand over the aircraft, which will simply be on the territory of Ukraine, not performing combat missions. So there's no point handing those over until all the infrastructure is in place. They'll just be sitting targets for the Russians, and they're waiting to hit those F-16s. It's going to be a challenge because there's only so many places these things can take off from, and the Russians will know where they are. Part of that infrastructure might well be the air defences in place around those airports, air bases. Right, Eric Schmidt has been quietly building a new drone startup in the US and Ukraine with a nesting doll of LLCs that have helped to conceal its operations and team members, according to Forbes. White Stalkers thing. Okay, let's go and look at this. This is a Forbes article. Eric Schmidt's secret White Stalk project aims to build AI combat drones. So he is a former CEO of Google. This guy knows his onions when it comes to IT, I guess, and he and is a pretty powerful guy. He's billionaire technologist Eric Schmidt has been quietly building a new drone startup in the US and Ukraine with a nesting doll of LLCs that have helped to conceal its operations and team members. Forbes first reported the project's existence this month and has since learned that it's called White Stalk, a reference to the national bird and sacred totem of Ukraine, where Schmidt has assumed the role of defense tech advisor and financier. White Stalk was formally established last August, according to Business Incorporation records and two sources with knowledge of the startup. The company has been developing a mass-producible drone that uses artificial intelligence for visual targeting and can function in zero-comms environments created by GPS jamming. Though it hasn't emerged from stealth, White Stalk has become an open secret in the drone community. 6 people familiar with its activities told Forbes. In Ukraine, Schmidt has toured factories and testing ranges and has reached out to numerous other startups in his capacity as a prolific military tech advisor. 3 of these individuals said. So it then details all the different kind of elements that he's created, lots of different companies and LLCs and bits and bobs that are working together under this kind of umbrella. So Schmidt has met with the Ukraine's top leaders several times since Russia first invaded the country last summer. He and a cohort attended a meeting in Kyiv with the country's wartime Minister of Strategic Industries, Alexander Kamyshin, top-notch guy. The first Deputy Prime Minister, Yulia Srivdenko, also present was Sebastian Thrun, an advisor to White Stalk, and Schmidt's former Google colleague, Mark Stonich, former Google supply chain vice president, and Damon van der Linde, a key engineer at Thrun's now defunct air taxi startup Kitty Hawk. So, top guys meeting to do top things. Even before leaving his post as Google chairman in 2017, Schmidt had been devoting significant time to US national security efforts. Between 2018 and 2021, he chaired the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence, and he advised Congress on AI for military use. And from 2016 to 2020, he led the Defense Innovation Board, an advisory group aimed at bringing new technology to the Pentagon, including data science and machine learning efforts. So he's going to know his onions in this respect. But when it comes to the military ecosystem in Ukraine, Schmidt is a relative newcomer. Last year, the billionaire seeded millions of dollars to a Ukrainian startup accelerator called D3, or Dare to Defend Democracy, which provides $125,000 in initial funding to defense tech companies there. Will Roper, former US Air Acquisition Chief and founder of Istari Digital, an AI-enabled weapons simulator backed by Schmidt, also attended the meeting with Ukrainian government officials last summer. Roper had not responded for a request or comments at the time of publication. 1 month later, Roper and Schmidt co-authored a Time op-ed with their advice to Kyiv to triumph. They wrote, "Ukraine must win the startup war that constantly brings new systems and new software to the battlefield." And this is one advantage that Ukraine has in that crossover or the interaction between the private sector and the public sector there, that I don't think is so prevalent in Russia. And there have been indeed Russians complaining about the bureaucratic holdup of state-run enterprises that work along old-school Soviet kind of organizational lines. So we talked about this recently, whereby they come up with a need for drone operators on the front line, then put this thing in place, and then develop these particular drones for 6 months or whatever, but actually, like 1 month later, the needs have changed because of the arms race and counter measures that are put in place, but they don't have the reactivity in the production line due to it being, Soviet bureaucracy, to be able to change and adapt to what the needs are in a quick fashion. And so they end up producing a load of effectively obsolete drones because of that problem. Well, now going on to AI drones, I don't know if this has anything to do with what Schmidt is doing, but that's really good news for Ukraine. Ukrainians take a scout drone with artificial intelligence. So this video shows the process of target recognition. The developers of the drone confirmed to Forbes journalists, again another Forbes article, that drones have several times carried out autonomous strikes on Russian troops, that is, without the participation of the operator. So here they are, finding out I don't know what they're looking for and what the programming is, but this is a drone that can work out. You can see their light armor, working out all these different targets, and then is able to autonomously decide which targets it will take out, I presume. It's pretty incredible stuff there from the Ukrainians, but we also know that the Russians are using autonomous AI, or they're using AI with their drones as well. So that's not just a Ukrainian thing. Remember that. Vitaly Klitschko, the mayor of Kiev, has transferred 50 FPV drones to the Ukrainian military. Today, quote, today the 42nd Separate Mechanized Brigade of the Operational Command West on the ground of the ground forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine celebrates its Foundation Day. They were given 50 FPV drones as a gift to help our defenders to destroy the enemy. That's good news from Klitschko, who's obviously, well, he'll be happy with getting positive PR there because he's somewhat in opposition to Zelensky, different political parties and whatnot. Okay, Latvia is to hand over 14 more cars confiscated from drunk drivers to Ukraine. This is a scheme they have in place that if your car gets impounded, then it's going to go to Ukraine. And it's great because Ukraine needs cars as well as 4x4s. Cars are useful for military personnel because it disguises, obviously, that they're in disguises them. People think, oh, that's a civilian car. However, saying that, the number of cars that are taken out and civilian vehicles on both sides is huge because they're savvy to that. And if you're in a Skoda Fabia driving around the front line somewhere, then you ain't going to be Doris doing her weekly shopping. Okay. Denmark unveils $13.2 million worth of cyber defense aid package for Ukraine, providing vital support for Kyiv's cyber capabilities against Russian attacks in modern war. That is good news. Obviously, the war is being fought in many different realms. Cyber information space, connected to the cyberspace, and of course on the battlefield as well. Now, Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban, will remove the veto on the provision of 50 billion euros of aid to Ukraine. The EU has already received a positive signal on this issue. This was stated by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Finland, Elina Valtonen. This is amazingly important. And it's so important because, as you will hear soon in my weekly rant, US aid is not looking like it's going to come to Ukraine. And in fact, there is some good reason to believe it won't get there until November. And if Trump gets in, it won't get there at all. What people are worried about. Now, I'm going to go and talk about this a little bit later, but just to give you a bit of forewarning, I will be talking about Trump a little bit, and B, about the impasse in Congress. What you've got to understand is that, and I'm speaking to Greg Terry about this, is what everyone is talking about in Ukraine on the front lines. This aid from the US is that important, and we're all analysing this out there. I was listening to Ukraine the Latest podcast yesterday and the day before, and the focus on the US impasse and the upcoming elections is huge. Like, Americans might not realise this so much themselves, but the rest of the world is genuinely worried that if Trump gets in, then it's kind of game over for Ukraine. This is what people are genuinely thinking. And so if I don't talk about that and play around with these ideas, then I'm not doing a service to you as viewers. Now, for those who love Donald Trump, you hate me talking about that, because if I perchance criticize Donald Trump, then I've somehow committed blasphemy. I'm not bothered about that. Yes, I don't like the man as a human being. He's been found liable for sexual abuse, and he's been found for defamation, and he's then defamed while being found for defamation. Literally evidence for his defamation has been provided, I believe, from him in the court, putting things on Truth Social whilst being done for defamation. Like, it's just insane. Anyway, so the human being's not a nice person. I don't like him as a human being, but I don't like him as a politician. I think he's dangerous. I think he's dangerous for the rest of the world. And we'll talk about this in a little bit with regard to what's going on in Congress, because it's even more worrying now, I think, than I previously realised. But let's just concentrate on a couple of geopolitical things outside of that first. So the EU prepares new sanctions against Russia ahead of February 24th anniversary. A new package of sanctions will expand the list of individuals and entities. It's also planned to allocate 5 billion euros to Ukraine from frozen assets and agree on a transfer of 50 billion euros, that will be. So the EU is obviously becoming more and more of an important entity for Ukraine as the US possibly recedes out of this conflict. Latvian president supports a ban on Russian grain imports. Latvian President Egers Rinkovics said at a press conference on January 24th that he would support a ban on the import of Russian grain, both for political and economic reasons. German Chancellor Scholz has stated that Germany and Ukraine are nearing the completion of a security pact designed to provide assurances for Ukraine to be similar to the one that has been signed with UK. That is supposed to be the blueprint for these other ones being produced. But Scholz has also called the financial assistance allocated by the European Union countries for Ukraine this year as insufficient. Berlin calls on allied states to increase defense support. I think this is again in light of what's going on in the States. Scholz realizes that it's about to hit the fan. Germany have stepped up to the tune of perhaps 8 billion euros. They are providing most of the hardware at the moment out of anyone. It is incumbent upon the rest of the world, the EU and European nations and UK to pick up where the US has kind of pick up the baton that the US has dropped, in the hope that the US will come back into the race. But right now, it's up to the rest of Europe, and Olaf Scholz here is saying, yeah, and a lot of you guys need to step up more. We've stepped up. What are you guys doing? At the same time, Biden so there is military things going on in the US. Biden is urging Congress to approve the F-16 sales to Turkey. This is partly what was going on really under the table, as far as, while there's all this talking was going on up here to do with Sweden acceding to NATO and burning the Quran and all this stuff with Turkey. Under the table, they're like doing a deal. Turkey was just wanting F-16s and this and that, and there was the kind of leveraging going on. So Joe Biden sent a letter to Congress saying that he intends to launch a process once Turkey finalizes Sweden's admission to NATO. Reuters reported. At the same time, it's all going badly in terms of trade routes in the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. U.S. arm of the Danish shipping and logistics company, shipping company, something else, shipping company, Maersk has announced that they will be halting any further transits through the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden until a further notice, following an anti-ship ballistic missile attack earlier today by the Houthi terrorist group in Yemen against two of their American-flagged and owned cargo ships. Okay, so that's not good news. And in fact, when you look at the Suez Canal container ship volume, I presume this one back in March 2021 was when that one got stuck. Was it the Greenland? Got stuck across the Suez Canal and just stopped shipping for ages. And that was just that one thing happened. It shows you how vulnerable, how fragile these routes are. One ship gets stuck, global trade is massively affected. That's one ship getting stuck. Now we have what's going on in Yemen really affecting global trade. That is absolutely catastrophic, and that's why the UK, the US, and other allied nations are trying their hardest to stop the Houthis from doing that. Right. At the same time that stuff's going wrong around the world, UK, according to the General Chief of Staff, I think it might be, is he outgoing, and that's why he's said something like this? I'm not sure, but he's basically said that UK citizens must be prepared for war with Russia. That we're living in a pre-war generation. Yeah, it's a bit of scary rhetoric going on there. The foundations for national mobilization could not be confined to countries neighboring or close to Russia, and as a result, ordinary people in the UK would be forced to join UK's 74,110 full-time regular army to see off an active threat to mainland Europe, material states. Yeah, this has got a lot of people talking. There's a lot of people coming out saying no, don't worry about it. To be fair, I was having a chat on the side of the rugby pitch at my son's training last night with one of my mates. A few of them were talking about this, and I was saying to them, look, as I said in my video the other day, this isn't going to be a war with Russia that is tanks against tanks. This is going to be a game of nuclear chicken. Russia doesn't need a big army to go to war with NATO. They just need to threaten nuclear war and then see who flinches first. One of my mates, who's a former Royal Engineer, so he's a military man, and I let him know I'm going to Ukraine at some point. Anyway, I clapped, and he's got this dark sense of humour. I clapped. The boy's doing something really good. I was like, yeah. I was like, oh, one man clapping. Where are you guys? Why are you guys not clapping that? And he said, well, you might as well take advantage while you got both of them. Like both my hands. I was like, oh, that's dark, mate. Oh, that's dark. Yeah, I hope I'm safe, obviously. So yeah, there is a lot of rhetoric going on around Europe that is reflecting a worry about the current state of affairs militarily and geopolitically. The Ukraine war is massive, and this is why it's even more frustrating that there's an impasse in Congress in the States, because it really is massive, and everyone is recognizing how important. At the same time, North Korea says it's tested a new strategic cruise missile. It's conducted tests of that, and it's also announced. Did Kim Jong-un also announce that he's not going to unite South Korea and North Korea? It's just not going to happen. They reconfirm this stance that basically they're at war, right? Things are not looking good in North Korea and South Korea when they're doing stuff like this still. And then the Pentagon has estimated the US military build-up in the Middle East since Hamas's October the 7th attacks on Israel have cost $1.6 billion. A bill the department is unable to pay due to lawmakers' inability to pass a budget, per to US officials. Now, these are US troops, not just that, but there's an element of this is US troops on the ground. When you talk about Ukraine, the fighting's being done by the Ukrainians. Like, there isn't that risk to service people. So it's really frustrating. Anyway, stuff is happening all around the world that is making people like me get jittery and thinking, oh my goodness, are we going to hell in a handcart? What is happening? We need to be so strong now. Stop. Yeah, China's looking on and going, well, I know economically we're in a lot of trouble at the moment, but look at the mess that's going on over there, and they can't support Ukraine, so Russia's going to have some joy over there. Then hey, it's a good time to attack Taiwan. Whereas if we've been just really, really bloody strong and united and say, no, Russia, you ain't doing that, and we're all going to stop you doing that, and we're going to give Ukraine as many weapons as they need, and we're going to support them, not just as long as it takes, but we're going to support them for victory, and victory looks like this, and it's going to happen as soon as possible. And then Russia gets a bloody nose, and then goes back to being Russia back in Russia. Then China goes, oh dear, no, we won't do that. But because that didn't happen, there's all this dithering. And now what's going on in Congress is just sending the wrong message out to the world. And this is where I get ranty, because it's really bloody annoying me. Really annoying me. Max23 here says several sources in the US media claim that the delay in aid to Ukraine in Congress is due to Trump's pressure and his desire to build a campaign on migration issues. Compromise regarding Ukraine border is not in his interest because it would add points to Biden before the election. You need to understand this. This is a really good point. Doug Klein here says sources confirm that Trump is directly trying to tank the Ukraine border negotiations to deny Biden a political win and keep immigration as a campaign issue this year. If the border issue gets sorted, I said this the other day, if the border issue gets sorted, so if they come to an agreement and do a compromise and everyone's happy because something's been done and the border gets kind of to some degree sorted, then that's the issue sorted and the Republicans will have nothing to shout about. That's why I'm saying they should sort the border out. Like Biden should basically just say, yeah, okay, we'll do what you want. But then there's this argument that the Republicans won't even take that. They're not interested in actually sorting the border out. They're interested in winning the election. And to win the election, the border still needs to be an issue. I can't tell you how important this is. But I'm at the point where Ukraine aid will not go because the Republicans will not do a deal. And they will not do a deal because they realize that they need that issue to be in place so they can campaign on it. That's 10 months away. They are still going to be campaigning on that. There will be no border deal. I'd love to be wrong. Maybe there will be. Maybe they realize that for some other reason it has to happen. But as far as I'm reading it at the moment, it's highly unlikely. This guy says there's a few ways this might go. A few are good for Ukraine, and above all, precious time has been wasted. Recent polling shows that Trump wields outsized influence on the Republicans on Ukraine. So for Republican voters, a direct appeal from Trump against Ukraine aid torpedoes their support. Congressional Republicans know this. So think about being a Republican lawmaker, a senator or a congressman or woman who is Republican but for Ukraine aid. You are really in a difficult position here. Despite McConnell's comments, not all Republicans are on board. Somebody who's trying to defeat legislation all in the name of running for office, that is irresponsible, Bill Cassidy told USA Today. It's possible McConnell is trying to open the path to delinking Ukraine, and we'll come on to this in a second, delinking Ukraine and immigration reform so that Ukraine, maybe with Israel package, can be put forward on its own merits. It's like decoupling it from Ukraine. As a Senate Republican staffer said privately last week, the votes for Ukraine are absolutely there. But what's really frustrating, this is going back to, this is an outsized, this is people who are able to shout the loudest and make it look like Republicans are against aid for Ukraine are having the power to stop aid going through. It's a small vocal minority that are screwing everything up. It's that MAGA wing. And we'll come on to an article that looks at that. But Trump's direct intervention could also tank a Ukraine deal. He hasn't come out publicly against yet, thankfully, but so doing would make it very difficult for Republicans to defy him in an election year. He'd single them out, and doing the right thing just isn't worth it to many. So that's what I'm saying. Those who want to do the right thing, the Republican lawmakers who know what the right thing to do is, can't do it because actually if they come out against a Trumpian position, they will be absolutely excoriated by Trump. They'll be hung out to dry. That's just how Trump operates. No matter what, it's worth remembering how much time has been wasted here. Ukraine, 4 months now, is running out of ammo. Ammo missiles are getting through air defense. More people are dying. The delay is happening because some are choosing political power over national interest. The worst of cynical politics are on display from Republicans and Trump here. McCarthy thought linking Ukraine border could save his speakership. The White House was willing to make a deal, and now Ukraine is being treated like nothing more than a bargaining chip. From colleagues doing regular meetings with congressional officers, there is zero energy or motivation to make something happen on Ukraine. They support Ukraine. They don't feel the urgency or like they have a chance of making something happen themselves. Many Republicans want to aid Ukraine, but they won't break with Trump over it. The European and especially Ukrainian observers remember that many of these officials could have been killed by Trump's people on January the 6th, yet they stand by him. Trump's the X factor here. Above all, this shows that US politics in 2024 are too unmoored from rational statecraft for Europe and Ukraine to rely on America. That is a devastating reality. I'm hoping to publish more Detailed articles soon on what Europe can do to hedge against the second Trump administration. The coming days will be critical for Ukraine. Does Trump come out against the deal? Does the Senate bring something to a vote anyway? Can Ukraine and immigration be de-linked? America's allies are watching. Putin is watching. Ukrainians are fighting and dying. What are we doing? That thread to me says it all, right? The only chance is de-linking. So going forward over the next few weeks, can Republicans, decent Republicans, manage to de-link these things? And by decent, I actually include Mitch McConnell there, and I don't really mean that. This is summed up basically. Just someone on my thread last night said this, and it sums it up. I've thought about this overnight, and I have but one thought. So thank you, Stephen Lyons. Why would the GOP want to deal on the border, as that is the real Trump shouting ground for MAGA? If they were to deal on the border, then Haley might have a greater chance of winning the race. And how many of the moneyed supporters of Trump want that? No, I'm afraid that there will be no agreement, as Trump holds too many under his wing. With EDA, so this is the Excess Defense Act, so they can, US can sell or give equipment away that is deemed as obsolete or excess. With EDA, Ukraine still gets its ammunition, and the GOP still gets to allow MAGA to shout about the border, reducing the possibility of Haley winning the race and allowing Trump to the run, even though he is probably the least likely to win against Biden. The problem with the EDA is this just won't be enough, and is probably more difficult to sort out than just giving the aid package. Now, here is a Washington Post opinion piece by Josh Rogin, but I think it's on the money. But from the beginning, far-right House Republicans have intended to kill the aid by linking it to immigration reform, and the White House and Senate fell into the MAGA trap. The fate of both efforts falls on one man, House Speaker Mike Johnson, who is beholden to his right wing and to former President Donald Trump. It is increasingly evident that Johnson has no actual plan or political incentive to compromise on either issue. The result is a legislative mess that will likely result in no Ukraine funding coming out of Congress this month, or perhaps ever. US support for Ukraine could dry up, a nightmare scenario for Ukraine and for US strategy in Europe. Chuck Schumer, the Democrat, has said is more optimistic than ever before that Senate negotiators were close to a deal. So he's saying positive things, but I think the reality is that there's no incentive for the Republicans to do this, because actually they want to hold this over the Democrats for the campaign season. Anyway, to continue, Johnson's mixed messages after the meeting were a giveaway. On Wednesday afternoon, he called the White House meeting, quote, productive, and said there was some consensus. This is when he's called into the White House to be shown stuff and talked about how important this was. He said there was some consensus on how to get the deal done. But hours later, he said on Fox News that he is closely consulting with Trump, who's actively campaigning against any compromise. On Sunday, in a leaked call with GOP members, Johnson went further, saying he wouldn't accept any Senate deal and that he doesn't think the border issue can be resolved or solved until a Republican becomes president. If he is saying, behind closed doors, in a leaked, conversation, that there ain't going to be a border deal until Trump's in charge, then that's goodbye Ukraine aid. GOP supporters of Ukraine aid, who rightly warned that letting it run out would be a disaster, are increasingly concerned that the MAGA right-wingers will succeed in halting the vital military assistance. Quote, the Speaker is going to have to make a hard decision about what to do, House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Michael McCall, Texas, and he's very pro-Ukraine, told me, if we abandon our NATO allies and surrender to Vladimir Putin in Ukraine, it's not going to make the world safer, it's going to make the world more dangerous. Ronald Reagan would never have surrendered to the Soviet Union. Maybe that's a shift in our party. I have just written an article on this, if you want to read it. I wrote this a couple of days ago. I did post it on my community tab, but this latest article is Southern Border versus Ukraine's border, a dangerous leverage, where I talk about that linkage and how I find it problematic. It's a read for you. Please go and check it out, see what you think. Yeah, you probably know my opinions already, right? So inside the White House meeting, top Biden national security officials gave detailed and grave warnings about what such a delay would mean for Ukraine's battlefield situation. Johnson responded by blaming the administration for mismanaging the war. He seemed to feel no ownership of the calamity his MAGA-dominated conference's lack of action could precipitate. And this is what frustrates me. There's many of you, and I know who you are. I know the names of you. I know who you are in my thread who will say this is the Democrats' fault, as if the Republicans have no freaking responsibility here at all. Like I said to you before, and I used it in this article, I used the analogy of this. One can liken it to this analogy. Danny and Reg are neighbours. There is a fierce fire burning just beyond the fences of the two properties. Danny notices the fire encroaching on their land and suggests to Reg that they should work together to put the fire out to save their houses. I can't do it alone. I need to work together to put that fire out. Otherwise, it's going to burn our houses down. Reg agrees that this would be a great idea in principle, but then demands $10,000 from Danny before helping out. The two people argue over how unreasonable or not that demand is, and all the while, the fire burns their properties to the ground. Reg then has the audacity to blame Danny for the destruction for not paying him $10,000. That's how I read this. So I hate this idea that it's all the Democrats' fault when they would go. They want that aid to go, and it's the Republicans that came to the Democrats and say, "No, you can't have that aid until we sort out this border thing," and then don't seem to be willing to compromise in trying to sort out. They're not interested in actually doing a deal, right? And then blame the Democrats for Ukraine failing and aid not getting to Ukraine, even though they were the ones that did the linking and did the leveraging. Johnson is able to deflect responsibility for now by pointing out that the Senate negotiators have come to terms. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is telling House members that the Senate's bill could be brought to the floor next week. Of course, that's what he said 2 weeks ago. To the Democrats' lead negotiator, Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut, Johnson and the House GOP are to blame for linking the border issue to the Ukraine aid in the first place, then stepping back from negotiations. That's exactly what I've just been saying. Quote, everyone knows the only way border policy can pass is if it's bipartisan, Murphy told me. The Senate can't wait for House Republicans to acknowledge reality, so we are working to find a bipartisan solution to this problem. Maybe House Republicans should do less complaining and more compromising. Look, when you don't have the majority of the Senate, when you don't have the president, and when you only have a very slim majority in the House of Representatives, you have to bloody compromise. You can't just demand things and say, ain't nothing going to happen until we get exactly what we want. That's fine if you have the majority, but if you don't have the majority, that is not doing politics. And what you're doing is you're wrecking both. You're wrecking both the border and Ukraine by not allowing anything to happen. You have to compromise. As politics is compromising. Right. But Johnson has no political motivation to move against the right wing and defy Trump to support a state compromise. Why give President Biden a win on the border going into the general election? Setting extremist standards for immigration reform was part of MAGA's plan to kill both efforts all along. They cynically calculated that the result would be too complicated and controversial to pull off. The MAGA strategy is insidious, actively killing aid to Ukraine while refusing to admit as much. But make no mistake, if Congress lets Ukraine aid lapse without acting, the history books will hold Johnson and Trump responsible for helping Russia win the war. The history books aren't going to be all that bothered about what goes on in the southern border of the US. History books are going to be a lot more bothered with what happens in Ukraine with Russia, because geopolitically, that dictates what takes place next in the world. And the place that the southern border will have in the history books is screwing all of that up. Not in and of itself being an important international thing. Mitch McConnell, yes, Republican Party Senate Minority Leader, is floating the idea of splitting the issue of Ukraine funding and border security reforms amid his party's infighting, The Hill reported yesterday. That would be fantastic. Will it get through? I don't know. If the Senate Republicans are willing to take up a standalone Ukraine bill, then this could clear a path to a discharge petition in the House, especially if Israel assistance is separated. But if they aren't, then further US assistance to Ukraine is essentially dead. This is John Ridge. I want to interview John Ridge. He's an expert on all things munitions and military, and sounds like he's pissed off. Reminder that there is a very large group of people, says John Ridge, both online and in reality, with absolutely no principles, who will not hesitate to throw 44 million Ukrainians under the bus in pursuance of their own domestic political objectives. And make no mistake, if they are unwilling to, and this is so important, you might not like hearing this if you are of this persuasion. But make no mistake, says John Ridge, if they are willing to throw the Ukrainians under the bus, they will do the same to the Taiwanese, the Koreans, the Japanese, the Poles, and any of our other allies in Europe. And when you have Trump the other day starting to blame the Taiwanese and saying, would you help the Taiwanese? Well, they did nick our microchip industry. You start piecing things together and you're thinking, are the US just going to give up being an international member of the international community? Is that make America great again by just receding into your own little hut that is the United States and not doing anything to assist the world at all and watch the world burn? Fair enough, go for it. Now, there's a Repo Act which is gone through this Foreign Relations Committee and been voted through 20-1. Repo Act basically says we're going to repossess a load of Russian assets and then use that to fund the war. So people are getting really excited about this because it's got really strong bipartisan support and it could go to the floor and get voted through. So if the House of Reps makes this colossally stupid decision of not supporting Ukraine this year, these funds could provide a fallback, says Phillips O'Brien. But by the way, it's far from a panacea. It would take time, and using the funds to purchase US weapons throws up a number of roadblocks. So it would take longer for Ukraine to get less. It's a fallback, but far from ideal. So this is really good news on the one hand. On the other hand, Mark Hartling here saying this is a big deal. Senate Foreign Relations Committee has advanced the legislation to seize Russian assets to fund Ukraine. However, as someone says straight away below, expect decade-long litigation before any such proposal is implemented. That bill is all but certain, but to be challenged in court all the way to SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States. Bottom line, that bill is no substitute for much-needed financial assistance to Ukraine that Congress should adopt ASAP. Yes, it should. And meanwhile, Nikki Haley is interesting situation going on there. Like, she's needs money to keep her campaign going, and it turns out that actually she's getting that, it looks like. But Trump is threatening Nikki Haley donors, so people who are giving money to Nikki Haley, saying that anyone who will contribute to her campaign will be quote permanently barred from MAGA camp. And that's, he said that on a Truth Social post. Anybody that makes a contribution to Bird Brain, because that's how juvenile this man is. Anybody that makes a contribution to Bird Brain from this moment forth will be permanently barred from the MAGA camp. We don't want them, and we will not accept them because we put America first and always will. You juvenile, pathetic man. I'm sorry, you are, and I don't care. There's going to be a lot of people that's annoyed with me slanging off Trump. But to Nikki Birdbrain Haley, he's so childish. He's so vindictive. He is so... the importance of the role of the President of the United States is above that kind of behavior. Grow up and sod off. And let's have someone in who can reach across the aisle, who can do foreign policy with nuance and with a brain. I just no to him. And we need to get aid to Ukraine, and it's just not looking good with the political landscape in the US at the moment. What are your thoughts? Am I way out? If you love Trump, don't come at me with just rhetoric. Come at me with why I am wrong. Why will Trump be good for Ukraine? Give me good evidence to support that. Because at the moment, what he's actually said with his actual words are that he will compromise and give territories back to Russia. And what he's actually said about Vladimir Putin are far more affirmative of Putin and he said kinder words to Putin than he has to Zelensky. You look at the history of what he said about Putin and to Putin. You tell me why Trump would be good for Ukraine, because at the moment he's empirically at the moment in putting a roadblock in the way of Ukraine aid, he is literally being responsible, in my opinion, for the death of Ukrainians. How would that man be good for Ukraine?